we are ready.
All right. I call the May 11th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. I get the roll call.
Yes. Chair Ron Heberlein.
Yep.
Cameron Mesbah.
Here.
Jennifer Willard. Here. Olive Gallagher. Here. Brianne Tusinski. Here. Aaron Woods.
Here.
And Andrew Carr.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Staff, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, staff. Now we are to the citizens' input. This is the time that citizens have the opportunity to address the Planning Commission regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing tonight. Therefore, if any member of the audience, either here in City Hall or via Zoom, would like to speak about any work session item or any other matter of concern, please raise your hand or send a message to the recorder using the Zoom chat function so that we may hear from you now.
There are no attendees at City Hall, and we are looking to see if there's anyone on Zoom. And there is no one on Zoom.
All right. Great. Thank you. Now we move on to our administrative matters. Consideration of the April 13th, 2022 Planning Commission minutes. The minutes were previously distributed. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Right. Seeing no indications of minutes corrections, the minutes are approved as distributed. All right. Now we'll move on to our work session item. Looks like we have Mr. Polly up for some outreach framework.
Thank you, Chair Heberlein, Commissioners. My name is Miranda Bateshell, Planning Director for the City of Wilsonville. We actually will not have Mr. Polly with us this evening to present this item, but the team is jumping in and covering in his absence, so we'll do the best that we can. I thought I would just give a little bit of background on kind of the impetus for this project, where this came from the city's perspective, and then I'll introduce our consultant team who is here this evening ready to present this topic to you, give you an introduction, and then we have some specific discussion questions for you that you probably noted on page 3 of your staff report that was provided in the packet along with the attached materials. So just to give a little bit of context for this project, I was before the Planning Commission several years ago presenting on a project, and we were presenting findings from a survey report. And with that survey report, there were a number of demographics that we were able to report out that we asked of survey respondents. And the report out of those demographics was pretty consistent. There wasn't a lot of variety. And I was asked point blank by a commissioner, rightfully so, whether or not that was representative of the community at large and whether we were really hearing from everybody in the community. And the answer to that was no. And we knew that. The question was, how could we do better? So as many of you know, when we went through the Town Center planning project, we had a very robust outreach process. We did surveys, we asked for demographic information, and when we saw who was missing, we went and we tried to find the voices that were not in the process, who were not in the room, and we went to try to go to them and get input and have broader dialogue and include more people in the process that we often don't hear from. As you know, since then, we've also on subsequent projects had very specific focus groups to try to do outreach with populations we often don't hear from. We had a specific grant to do additional outreach to the Latinx community through our House Bill 2001 and housing variety work. And since all of that time, we've also, as a city, launched our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, who is hopefully going to help us on this trajectory towards more robust and inclusive outreach and engagement, among many, many other things that they are going to be working on and helping to advise the City Council on. So a lot of this is to just provide some of the history, some of the background, some of the what's been happening over the past few years in terms of where we've been. Through these different projects, the Planning Division, we've had a lot of lessons learned. In Town Center, we spent a lot of time and a lot of money because some of the things didn't work and we had to go out and do new things. And we are still learning. There's still a lot of engagement that we haven't hit the mark on and that we still need to be better on. And then thirdly, we want to make sure that we're sharing this across the city. You know, planning often has these visionary projects and we're out there, and community engagement is a core component of the projects we do. It's not always necessarily, we're not always speaking to and informing other departments and divisions throughout the city who also need to do engagement, and maybe less frequently, and we're not always sharing those lessons learned with them. So the project that's in front of you tonight is intended to be an inclusive outreach framework. It is, the impetus for that is to try to hit on all those marks I just introduced, to capture what we have learned, to use our consultants and do additional outreach to figure out what else we need to be doing, and then to capture that in a framework that can be replicated and used throughout the city in our different outreach efforts on multiple projects and different initiatives, not just in planning, but elsewhere. But since we obviously will use this a lot in planning, and in front of you, our Planning Commission, who also serves as our Committee for Citizen Involvement, you are a very important commission and board to bring this topic to. And so with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to the consultants. They're going to introduce to you the framework and the points of discussion this evening, where we're at in the project. It's early, so you'll have more than just this opportunity to discuss it, but this is an important time to discuss it with you. So with that, I will introduce Bill De La Cruz and Pat Noyes.
Great. Thank you so much, Miranda. Commissioners, it's a pleasure and honor to be with you this evening to share, as Miranda said, a very early draft of a framework that my colleague and I, Pat Noyes, have been working on with the city to collaborate both on some of the best practices that they're seeing and also on some of the barriers. And what you're going to see tonight is just a really initial framework that we gleaned after talking with folks from the city, after participating in some focus groups, and really looking at this as an opportunity for the city to basically create a community engagement framework that can be used in any department. And as Miranda said, with the projects that you all have going on right now in Wilsonville, that the importance for community engagement is really high, and that the diversity of voices aren't always captured. So we're hopeful that through this framework that you'll be able to have some really clear tactics and strategies to be able to gather those voices. So as you continue to move forward, the best interest of the majority of folks in Wilsonville are captured in the planning and the movement forward in Wilsonville. So I'm going to introduce Pat Noyes, and then she's going to lead you into the PowerPoint that we're going to share with you this evening.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you all for having me here, having us here, and for trusting us to lead you through this process. This is very important work, and I'm really pleased with some of the things we've already learned about what Wilsonville already does, and the way we can build on those and expand those to make them more consistent across all of your projects and planning initiatives. So with that, I would like to ask that we start the PowerPoint. Oh, it's working. right.
Talk and it happens.
Yeah, thank you. So the purpose, as Miranda was outlining, is really to find a way to engage stakeholders, residents, businesses, property owners, anybody who has a potential interest or could be potentially impacted by any decision that the city makes, planning, policy, new initiatives, programs, anything in a consistent way so that they know how they can get involved, what to expect when they do get involved, and to really establish a process that can increase not only a diversity, but also to increase the involvement of what are considered historically underrepresented communities or groups and individuals. So the way to do that is really to provide a very consistent, fair, and accessible process that allows individuals in the community to say, oh, they're doing a process. These are the steps they're going to follow. This is how my voice will be heard. This is how my interests will be represented and move forward. So with that, going to the next slide, we've outlined in your handouts in the attachment 1, there is the draft. There's a description of each of these benefits in a little bit more detail. I think really the overriding benefit that the city will get out of having a consistent and inclusive process for engaging stakeholders is much better decisions. Not that your decisions haven't been good, it's just that they'll be more robust and they'll represent a broader view of the community as a whole and really allow you to get a lot of perspectives to craft really elegant solutions. So it really provides a sense of legitimacy to recommendations and outcomes and things that you will move forward, and really in the long term can reduce the cost and make the projects and the plans much more effective and much more representative of the community as a whole. So the next slide. What we have here are really the foundational principles that we put into developing this framework, that decisions that are made by the city that impact the community should really be done collaboratively, should be done in a way that you engage stakeholders in what we call an outcome-driven process. In other words, know why you're engaging them, and then make that clear so that they understand exactly how their input will be used, whether they will actually be active participants in decision-making, recommendation building, just providing general input. So we really want to be very clear from the get-go on why we're doing what we're doing in terms of engaging the public. It needs to be as inclusive as possible, fair. People need to be able to track how their input is used, how their perspectives are used, and be able to see how they go from point A to point B. And if something is overlooked or missed, they have a way to then come back and engage again and say, why was this not addressed, that kind of thing. So people really feel heard, they feel part of the process. And of course it needs to be accessible. And we'll talk a little bit more about accessibility and some of the issues associated with that when we talk about some of the barriers in just a minute or two. So going to the next slide. The framework overview, really what we're trying to do is create a document that is not too cumbersome, that provides some general guidance on the effective steps that the city can take to engage a broad cross-section of the public. So we've developed a 6-step process for engagement to help bring people into actual decision-making processes. Again, it needs to be flexible. So if you have a very simple planning project, this can be done very quickly in a meeting or two if it's very simple. and straightforward, and everybody agrees on what the issues are, what the outcome should look like, what success would be. If you have a very complex planning project or other initiative, then it can be expanded to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to engage at each step of the process. So the intention is that the steps are consistent, but the complexity of the application varies with the complexity of the project or initiative. So it's principle driven, it's fair, and importantly, it's seen as fair by the public. And part of making it fair is making sure that it's transparent, understandable, and accessible. So it really is, it's a foundation for designing engagement that really is more than just getting feedback or asking for, well, how do you like what we've already decided, but to really engage people in a way that they can have input into decision making. So with that, the next slide is just a very quick definition of the 6 steps. We can talk about these if you want more detail as we open up for discussion. But the basic 6 steps are, first, that we want to define the problem or the desired outcome in a way that everybody can agree on. Because if you don't have agreement on what you're trying to accomplish, you certainly won't have agreement on any solutions that you come up with. So that's a very important first step. The second step is to determine criteria and measures for how you know if an alternative is moving you toward the desired outcome. And we want to develop this evaluation process prior to brainstorming so that everybody understands and accepts and endorses it as a fair process for evaluating alternatives, rather than developing the criteria and alternatives after brainstorming, because generally what that leads to is defending or rationalizing favored alternatives. So this really builds in a very fair process by translating the desired outcomes into criteria and measures, and then moving in step 3 to the brainstorming alternatives. And really, this is the fun part. This is where everybody wants to go immediately. And what we just want to do is create a framework ahead of that shows them that we really do want to evaluate it in a way that reflects the values of the community. Step 4 is the actual evaluation. It's the application of step 2 to the alternatives or ideas that have been generated. And then step 5, particularly in a more complex planning process, gives you the opportunity to weigh the trade-offs. Not all alternatives are good or bad. They have good aspects, bad aspects, good for some people, bad for other people. And it really gives a structure to how you consider the range of values, criteria, what's important to community members, to groups within the community, that kind of thing. And through that conversation, you build and develop recommendations that are taken to the decision makers, to you guys, to anyone else on staff, the city council, whoever needs to make the final decision. And the recommendations then reflect what the community said was important, how they came up with ideas, and then finally how they grappled with the trade-offs between the alternatives. So there's more detail in the framework, although not a great deal, and we can certainly talk about each one of these steps if you have questions. But going to the next slide, I just want to kind of finish running through the overall document, and then we'll go to the staff questions. So what we want to do is, at the very start, I established the goals for community engagement. So as I said, in some cases, it may be informational. It may be that you have a very limited range of options and you want some simple input on, is everybody okay with this? But if you really want to engage in a full involvement of the community in developing recommendations, then you need to know in advance which one of those you really want to do. So establish the goals for the community engagement and what you're trying to accomplish. Build the process for that particular initiative on the 6 steps. Adapt the process to the complexity of the decision that's going to be made. We talked about that a little bit, and we can talk about that some more in terms of how the process is flexible. And then the interactions, we encourage the interactions to be as in-person as possible so that people have a chance to hear each other's perspectives and what's important to them, what their priorities are. Certainly in the last 2 years, we have all become more adept at the virtual engagement, and there are some advantages to that in terms of allowing people to have more flexibility and access to meetings that they might not otherwise have access to. So there needs to be some consideration for all of those advantages and disadvantages, but really the opportunity to hear each other's perspectives is critical in building consensus. Identify the key stakeholders and audiences. Again, that's going to be a process that allows folks allows the city to reach out to folks that might be directly impacted or to identify those who have been historically underrepresented. And then address barriers to the underrepresented stakeholders historically. And the next slide, if we can go there, we presented the general outline and focused on the barriers to engagement last night with the DEI committee, and got some really, really helpful input from them in terms of some actions that can be taken. The attachment 2 in your packet, and it's also probably in more detail in the framework itself, outlines these barriers to engagement and some ideas for actions to be taken. And what we heard last night were some additional actions to be taken that I think could be very helpful in really reaching out to underrepresented groups or those who just have had limitations on their ability to participate or even awareness to participate in the past. So these are some of the barriers that we've identified. We did not hear more from the DEI in terms of the barriers last night, but we certainly did some of the actions to overcome those. Again, we can talk about these in more detail as well. The next slide is also out of the framework, the attachment 1. And each of these is discussed in more detail in that document. But just to give you a sense of what I was talking about before is what's your purpose in your outreach. If it's informational, you really have a large array of options for getting information out to the public. If you just want input, like do you like it, do you not like it, are there other things that we should consider, then there are fewer, but still quite a few options for getting input from the public on activities that the city is undertaking. And then if you want to actively engage the public, stakeholders in the decision process, then there is yet a shorter list. And each of these has particular advantages and opportunities and limitations that need to be considered and understood when developing an outreach plan or approach for each one of your plans or initiatives. So that's sort of the quick and dirty overview of the framework. The next slide goes to the next steps. Right now we are working in support of the Frog Pond outreach effort, and really it's sort of a adjunct or consulting role. We're meeting with them in advance of their public outreach activities to help them sort of gauge how they might shift some of their questions or approaches or who they might involve, just to see if we can start integrating some of these principles into that project and almost pilot some of of the ideas that might not have been used in the past, and integrate them with some of the things that have traditionally been used successfully. We're going to finalize the framework. We have quite a few steps left to do. We're going to incorporate the input we got last night. We certainly will integrate the information we get from you tonight. Staff is identifying some folks that they would like us to interview, to talk to specifically about what it is we're doing, how we're doing it, and what their feedback is, or where they think we're missing the boat or need to add some additional perspective. And then we're also going to be working with staff. One of the most important things I think that we can do with staff is expand that menu of outreach activities to reflect all of the resources that Wilsonville has to bring to it, and really to get a much more local flavor to the overall framework, so that it is as useful to city staff across the various departments as possible. And then once we get the framework in a fairly final, if not final form, we will be conducting a staff training so that everybody who will be doing outreach to the public or any potentially impacted folks related to any initiative that the city undertakes understands what this framework is and how they might apply it. So with that, I turn it back to you, Chair, and note that in the questions in the packet, the first one really is focused on what is it we're missing, what else do you want to see in here. Hopefully you've had a chance to at least skim through the framework and understand what's there, and we would certainly appreciate the opportunity to get your input on the 4 questions, 2 related to the framework and the 2 related to the barriers and actions.
Great. Well, thank you, Pat and Bill. Appreciate the summary. So it looks like in the packet for the commissioners, looks like the questions are on page 3 of 4 of the staff report, if anybody wants to have those handy. And given that, I'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Carr.
Thank you, Chair. On the first one, is there any portion of the framework you feel is incorrect or missing? Just a couple of comments. I think maybe clarification on bullet point number 5, reduced long-term costs. Are we talking about project-specific costs, rework costs, legal costs? What? Because I think we have the potential to make the projects more efficient if we have community involvement and buy-in earlier in the project, not just reducing litigation costs. I think we can expand the scope of that bullet point number 5. For instance, if I think of the bridge over the waterway over to Villebois, I think if we would have had a little bit more involvement, we may have saved a whole bunch of money on not only litigation but rework. So I think we should expand the scope of bullet 5. On page 2, in the effective engagement, we listed collaborative, outcome-driven. I think maybe a 7th bullet we could add is diverse and representative. I think that's one of the overall goals here, is to make sure that the people that we're engaging with are of a diverse quality and they're representative of our community in its totality. So I'd like to maybe consider adding that. And then a question on, I think it's page 12, the different activities. So have you, this would be kind of for probably Pat, what activities are we as a city missing that other cities or municipalities, counties have used that aren't on our list? I don't know how inclusive that list is. I know that's what we currently do, but are we missing the boat on any of those items?
You know, that is actually something that we want to unpack a little bit more with staff, because I am not as familiar. What I have learned in talking to staff is that Wilsonville has implemented a lot of really good progressive outreach activities, and I honestly don't think there are any fundamental activities that are missing in terms of what you're doing now. But I think there are some particular nuances and applications that as we go through it, maybe we want to add variations of things in there that may not have been tried in Wilsonville. But I think part of our work with staff in the upcoming weeks is to really tease out all of those activities in a way that we can maybe expand on them.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. And then question 2, what specific aspects of the framework could use further detail, guidance, and/or clarification? I thought in identifying the key stakeholders on page 6, bullet 3, says how can we engage the most affected community? I think we need to add identify and engage. I think one of the problems we may have is identifying who the right stakeholders are or the right affected community, and then applying the framework to those. On the barriers and actions for attachment 2, are there any barriers you would suggest adding? No, I don't have anything to add to the barriers. As far as what additional ideas might you have to address listed barriers, I thought we might incorporate SMART into the events as a way of maybe encouraging those that can't get to physical meetings, because SMART is, in the city of Wilsonville, SMART is a free resource. And it pretty much encompasses the entire city. So making sure we, include instructions for how to get to a meeting with SMART, naming bus lines and et cetera, things like that. That I thought might be a good idea for ways to help action items. I think that's all I got. Thank you, Commissioner, or Chairman.
Let's see. Commissioner Woods, you're next on my list.
Okay, thank you. First off, I have a foundational piece that I think would be really important to have for everyone. And throughout this document, I noticed that we mentioned historically underrepresented groups. What does that mean? If I asked everyone on every one of the commissioners what that means, I'm sure we'd get a different answer. So one of the first things I think that we should have is a clear definition of what we mean when we're talking about underrepresented communities. I think having that makes it clear for each one of us or anyone that's looking at this to understand that. And I'm sure that there are a couple of definitions that include the content of that. And I just want to make sure that, to me, that's a foundational piece that we should include. When I look at the questions here, okay, what would a successful public engagement look like? I think having all of the stakeholders that are identified, certainly as part of that underrepresented group, as many of them to be a part of this as can be. I think when we're casting this net to these various groups in the city, it's going to be really important that some of the groups who may be apprehensive about engaging, that hopefully we could have some, I'll use the term ambassadors, or even community groups that could help to reach out to these particular other groups and encourage them to participate. One of the other questions here I'm looking at is the timeline and the decision-making structure that will ultimately drive this process. I think from a timeline standpoint, and in creating that timeline, I think we need to be very open about that and really think about what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and then what that structure of decision-making will help to drive the entire process in looking at that. Another one is, let's see, this is the fourth bullet, who is affected, which community groups or stakeholders can help engage the most affected community members. Well, who are the most affected community members? I think that's one of the things that we certainly need to find out, and as we identify who those groups are, I think that will come to bear. Let's see here. Some of the other pieces here that I had, one of the things I think that's going to be important is as we're looking at the various communities, the various organizations in the communities that could help to identify who these key stakeholders are and the audiences, I think it's going to be important to truly understand how we can engage these community groups to be a part of this, because I think they may have even a more closer relationship with some of these groups that the city either doesn't know or are apprehensive. You know, one of the things is that I know there are some individuals that, you know, are apprehensive about connecting at all with anything that's government or that has a government, connection there. So I think that's one of the things that we'll have to overcome. And then also we need to understand is how best to access, I think, identify and engage. What are the best ways to do this with these underrepresented members of the community? I'll stop there and let others speak, but I'm sure I'll have something else to say later.
Commissioner Wood. Commissioner Tazinski.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. To me, besides what's already been said, this looks, I don't see anything glaring, besides perhaps, like Commissioner Carr said, a little more local flavor, a little more in depth with what we've already got in the city, what else we can do that kind of just specifically applies to us. But other than that, it looks really intuitive and thorough, and I think you guys have done a great job so far.
Commissioner Gallagher.
Well, a lot has already been said. I think I'd like to jump on a couple things that Aaron pointed out, because I think they're really important. Timing, to me, is something that I don't see mentioned anywhere. And also the idea that right now in our country in general, there is a lot of skepticism and mistrust, both around any kind of governmental or institutional organization, but also just a feeling of feeling disenfranchised and, you know, what difference does it really matter what I think? So I think the two things are probably integral, that when a person is asked to input in the process, I think could have a lot to do with them feeling that they really could make a difference. And so I think that not only the message itself, the words itself, and that's what I spend my time professionally doing, is the words that get used to try to get people excited and interested and to feel that what they have to think and say, that we really do care and it is important and it matters. And I think that if we can find a way to do that and to make people feel that we're trying to create an active process rather than a reactive process, could be very useful to our being successful.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, sure.
So when you said timing, I was thinking you were talking about the timing of the development of the framework, and then as you went on, I got the sense that what you were really talking about is when we engage. And the intent is to engage from the very beginning with the very definition of the problem. Is that the timing that you're talking about?
Well, that's what I'm excited about you're doing, but the public doesn't know that.
Right.
So the perception out there that we have to overcome it's a power thing. It's power and control. It's a question of the general public feeling that they really are being asked and we need them to be engaged from the beginning rather than coming to them. We've already decided and we're just trying to get feedback so that their response to us isn't a reactive one to what they're in their mind maybe are thinking, but they've already, what power do we have? They've already really decided. Or, wow, we're going to get a chance to influence and really input into something where we can see maybe our dream take place. And that's part of what's gone wrong here. Not in Wilsonville, but in general. So yes and yes to both of your questions. Okay.
Could I just add something real quick to that because this is an important point. I think we need to realize that this openness that the city has, this is going to be new to many citizens, and especially our underserved communities. So I think it's important that we take that into consideration too, and the difficulty that we may encounter in getting these underserved communities to participate.
May I share just one point on that, Commissioner Gallagher?
Yes.
So I think that what you're saying is spot on in terms of what you and Commissioner Woods are saying about the trust and the openness, that it is a new process. And so the design is really rooted in addressing those pretty openly and talking about the skepticism that you mentioned and really looking at how do we do this in a way that really does build transparency and trust so that you're not only going through a process, you're also building community at the same time.
Exactly. That's the key word.
Yeah, and so really, even having you all message that and understanding it is a really key driver in terms of your leadership and your messaging. So you're not only messaging the process, we're also messaging that we understand that there's this level of skepticism and trust that we don't have a lot of in America today. And so how do we build on that?
I think there's an opportunity, sometimes being candid, being honest with people is really the most powerful thing, is to say, to basically verbalize and say, we know that it hasn't been done this way.
Yeah.
We know that we're trying to do something new, but our hearts are behind what we're doing because we recognize where it's not working and where you've been left out, basically, because there's a big feeling of that in the community. And, it's funny, when the meeting opened today, it's interesting. So many meetings, we open it up and we wait for community input, but nobody shows up. Well, I think you have to ask yourself why.
Yes, I would agree.
Well, I think, again, and I think the words, the actual message, the verbal words that we choose to present this, to communicate this to the community, those words are going to be really important.
Yeah.
And, and I'm more than happy in whatever way I can to contribute to that because it's what I do professionally. And it's important. So.
Yeah, that consistency of messaging is important. And the frame that we put on it is rather than be reactive, we want to be responsive. So we're moving people's thinking and mindset in this whole process that we're not being reactive, we're being responsive.
And we want to also engage. We really honestly are putting our hands out and saying, we need your help. We can't do this alone. We need you to help us do a good job for you.
Yep, great, thank you.
It changes the dynamic, yeah.
Great discussion. Commissioner Mesbah.
A lot of good conversation. When I first looked at the outline, all the right pieces were in there. And it kind of, when I look at public engagement, I always it's always depressing. Let me put it that way, because we are doing rear guard defense for abuses of power, for exclusive decision-making, top-down decision-making. I'm talking about not in Wilsonville, but in general. All of this stuff that has already been discussed. And the result has been a general lack of healthy civic engagement in the community. And when the DEI recommendation went out from the Planning Commission a couple of years ago, I was pretty vocal about my hope being that that committee will start working on creating a broad civic discussion and engagement across the community. And perhaps the Planning Commission needs to be doing that as well. You know, to have public hearings and expect people to come to us is fine, and legally we need to do that and all that. But we have said this on a couple of occasions, we need to go out and listen to the community. So that is the overall background, and I think we're going in the right direction. And I appreciate the spirit with which Bill was mentioning how this is trying to move the needle instead of reactive, to create an engagement ahead of time. And that is where timing and time comes in. Because the timing of engagement needs to be way ahead of the issues coming up.
Yes.
We need to have started to build consensus on issues before we have a new neighborhood, before we have a new highway or a bridge or whatever, so that the community's goals are pretty well discussed, and there is some general unity around what it is that on some of these broad subjects the community has already agreed. Now, you're not going to have complete agreement. That's not the idea. The idea is that these issues have been hashed out. That brings me to what Commissioner Carr was saying about diverse and representative. I'm fine with adding representative, but Wilsonville is not diverse. So if you stress representative, you might as well forget diverse, because you're not bringing people in. Unless, as part of your diversity, you start looking at those who are not in this community because they have been excluded. We have on occasion talked about why is it that certain minority groups aren't seen as much in Wilsonville. And some of the people who have lived here long enough said, well, maybe they don't feel like this is their kind of place. It doesn't feel welcoming or whatever. That, to me, is a barrier. They're not here, and there's a reason why they're not here. We need to look at that as a barrier if we are really serious about being diverse as a community. And if we're serious about diversity, giving us strength as a community, which I believe in. So I'm fine with saying representative, but we need to watch out that we are not diverse currently as much as we could be or should be. And the reason why that is particularly kind of germane to me is when we were having our task force on housing, we had certain people show up in the audience and they weren't talking because I guess they didn't feel it was their place. And after these sessions, they would come up to some of us and say, I'm homeless. I don't belong to Wilson. I don't live here because I'm homeless. But your housing strategy isn't doing anything for me. Now that's excluding somebody in our planning if we are not thinking about them. And they're not part of our community. So how would we know? So that is why, that experience to me said, oh, this is getting really interesting because we can have everybody who already lives in Wilsonville come and talk to us, and we're missing some of the picture when we do that. So the timeline then also becomes an issue. On some of these issues, the process, if it takes too long, is going to make the goal unachievable. When we talk about doing affordable housing, and our hearings and the process for planning it will take a year, you have already thrown out the affordability, because whatever that developer was trying to do is sitting for a year waiting to do it. And that has a cost. And that cost goes on that unit of housing, and it's not affordable anymore now. So we need to also worry about how long some of these processes take, and streamlining some of our processes so that they don't require hearing. And some of, in our planning work, we are already doing some of that by streamlining some of the decisions on design, this, that, and the other thing. That says these are minor, we don't need to have a hearing, we will have decided those in a hearing ahead of time as part of the planning or the neighborhood design or the approval, so that a particular high-rise, middle housing project in the middle of the neighborhood doesn't get bogged down. So that is another issue that I want to make sure our process takes into account, because time is money on some of these projects, and it can be counterproductive to the goal we are trying to reach. In the table that had all the activities, it was interesting to me that engagement was not checked for surveys and for websites. We are now starting to have gamification of surveys and gamification of websites that allows participants to play with the various measures and metrics and design elements and come up with solutions that they think are solutions. And the whole process is designed to show whoever is doing that what the unintended consequences of whatever it is that they thought they were doing are. It could put the city in bankruptcy. It's like Sin City, you think you know what you're doing. At the end, you're going to be bankrupt. That tells you all of the assumptions that you made based on an opinion were not really workable because they're not grounded in fact. That creates engagement because it creates real problem solving on these particular issues. And I know bigger cities that are doing that. Now, we may decide that Wilsonville doesn't have the resources to do something like that on its website, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't overlook the fact that both websites and surveys can be designed in a way where they will create engagement. And I have been harping on the city to move a city dashboard and infographics on its website towards completion, I should say, or more fruition, so that a lot of the data and information that anybody who wants to form some informed, educated idea about some subject could go on that dashboard and look up data and manipulate it, and for themselves check out viability of some options. That is the first step towards gamifying some of these input devices. And we have started to collect a lot of the data that goes into a city dashboard. I'm kind of really looking forward to that happening. That is it for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Mesbah. And last but not least, Commissioner Willard.
So I feel like sometimes the lack of engagement or the barriers is really predominantly time and awareness. I think there is some trust issues there, but I don't think that is the predominant. I think it's, I didn't know you wanted my feedback, and oh yeah, I knew that, but I just didn't have time. I think those are the two principal things. And so I'm an engineer, so my head goes to solution space. So I just keep thinking about how can we compete for the attention with everybody else is trying to compete for the limited resource of time as well. And so, I've got some ideas, but I don't know that that's what you're asking for. But two briefly that I have are, like what if we put QR codes in each of the smart bus stops so people could scan it while they're waiting, while they're idle, or on the smart bus themselves. That's really promoting, we want your feedback, and putting QR codes in the Boones Ferry Messenger. I read that all the time, and I always have really good intentions, but hey, pull out my phone and scan it right there and do that survey right there, right then. And then, we're all looking forward to our community activities to come back, farmers markets and the arts in the park and, all the other, those types of things. I don't know if the city has the resources, but I'd love to see us have a table there where they can come up and ask a commissioner a question. I'd volunteer to man the table every once in a while. Or have a table there where they could do the survey with that QR code on their phone right then and there. Those are some of the things where I feel like that would make us feel like real accessible people because we're down there at the farmers market or at the arts in the park or wherever, right alongside them. So I don't know that I answered your questions, but that's all the feedback I have in addition to what my peers gave you.
Well, we love hearing ideas as well, so thank you for those.
Mr. Chair, can I add one more thought?
Absolutely.
SMART was brought up, and it occurred to me that if the library can have a library smart bus going to the neighborhood, the Planning Commission could have it. You could have information on the bus that goes to target neighborhoods and encourage children to get involved, youth to get involved, junior youth to get involved, as well as the residents in workshops and getting their hands on specific kind of ideas and projects and so forth.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. You could have a contest for kids. What do you want this neighborhood to look like 10 years from now when you're a grown-up? Out of the mouths of children.
Yeah.
Some of the smartest things in the world.
Well, very true. Boy, I think, the commissioners have done a great job. I have a few specific things that I had jotted down after looking at the information. One thing that I didn't get, and maybe something that can be in the framework document as it gets developed, is my expectation. And I want to make sure that that's the expectation as well, is that this is a living document. When we go through a major project and we find out what works well on that project and what didn't, we can then go back and make some updates to say, okay, we need to tweak the framework here because we really saw that this method of engagement worked really well for our community or for this specific portion of the community. So that's something that I think is important, especially around the outreach activities. I think it's great to have a menu of outreach activities, but making sure that those activities have been successful in the past, specifically within our city and our key demographics, are things that are important. I know that Ms. Bateshell had a lot of fun with the town center plan and working through the engagement on that, and some things worked better than others. And I think that we can use some of that previous experience to help kind of prime the pump, so that when other parts of the city are using this engagement plan, they already have an idea of what things may work depending on who they're trying to go reach. I'm not sure this is really a barrier to engagement, but maybe more a barrier, I guess it is a barrier to engagement. Making sure that in the process that people are heard, specifically, in the individual steps where we're looking for that feedback, coming up with solutions to the problem. I've been in enough task force and different meetings. You can always see there tends to be specific people that are comfortable with being vocal and are willing to step up and say things. And making sure that we emphasize in this framework that engagement, a barrier to engagement, is also making sure that people are comfortable speaking up and making sure that everybody has their time to speak and is not just dominated by those powerful people that are not afraid to speak up. So I think that's an important thing. Another thing I was thinking of is, if possible, consistent engagement through the process. If we can get people hooked at the start, and then we can try to find a way to keep those people involved throughout the process, we will really do a good job of having people that have that deeper understanding of the issues and can help inform their neighbors, their peers about what's going on, and kind of be one of those spokespeople that can, when they hear something that somebody's saying that isn't quite right, which I've done with the Frog Pond planning, where people will say something that they thought they heard from somebody else, and I can say, no, that's not really how it worked. I was there the whole time. Here's how it went down. I think that's an important area to really get some good feedback from the community. The last thing I have, I think, on the framework specifically, when I was looking at the 6 steps, one thing that jumped out at me was on step 3, and where it says brainstorm alternative solutions to the problem. And it may just be the way I was looking at it, or am looking at it. When I read that, I immediately jumped to, so does that mean that there's already been solutions defined and now we're coming up with other solutions? And so that was something that jumped out at me as, well, maybe there's a better word for alternative. Maybe it's just brainstorming potential solutions to the problem, so that we don't give the impression that we've already come up with solutions and now we're coming up with more solutions or alternatives to something that's already predefined.
May I respond to a couple of things, Commissioner?
Yeah, sure.
Great. I want to just mainly focus on what you talked about, a living document. So part of the approach to this process and the framework is rooted in Ron Heifetz's work around adaptive leadership, and really looking at this from an adaptive perspective. The basic premise is that not one person holds the answer, and yet the answers are out within, in this case, our community. So how do we push the conversation out in terms of being very inquisitive? And the process of it is to implement, assess, adapt. So to your point, the whole framework is designed around a learning process, or an adaptive process, where you actually take the steps that you just defined, where we implement something, and then we go back right away and assess it and say, where did it hit the mark, where did we miss the mark, and what do we want to change? So right away we can start to tweak the process until we find the sweet spots in each one of these areas, knowing that they're always going to change, because the diversity and the importance of each project will change based on the communities that they impact. So I just think that's another impact that the process will have, is to kind of shift all of our thinking around how do we become more adaptive as we approach this work, especially with community engagement.
Great. Commissioner Gallagher.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on something, Ron, that you just said about, input. It can be very intimidating for some people to come to a meeting or stand up and speak their mind. And yet there are people out there that probably have ideas or concerns, but they need to feel that they're in an environment where it's safe, where they could feel comfortable telling another person, this is really bothering me, or I never have heard this discussed and I'd really like to. And I loved what was said before about, creating a place where people can come up to us and talk to us on a one-on-one basis. And I don't have any more to add to it right now, but there's a thread there of creating an environment where someone might feel comfortable walking into a room and sitting down with me across a table and telling me what they're upset about, but they would never come to a meeting at City Hall. So just something to consider.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I agree. I think the idea of becoming more accessible to the public will make that outreach easier in the long run. I want to be considerate of time. I know we're about 25 minutes past what we were planning. Does this give you the information you were looking for?
Yes, it absolutely does. It's really great feedback, and combined with what we heard from the DEI TI committee last night, we can regroup with Miranda and her team and start to build out some of these. And I will let Pat have the last word and close us out. Commissioner Heberlein.
I just want to thank you. I think the input here that we've heard tonight has been extremely helpful, and it sounds like what you're looking for is what we're trying to articulate here, and some of your input has really made that much more clear in my mind. And so I have a lot of ideas how we can start editing this and including your input. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, Pat and Bill, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing the progress that you guys make on this.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Bayshell, looks like we're moving into the informational portion. First topic is Town Center infrastructure funding.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Heberlein, Commissioners. Again, Miranda Bateshall, Planning Director for the City of Wilsonville. So I won't say a lot about this tonight. Most of you were involved in the development of the Town Center Plan, whether you were on the commission at that time or participating through some other means. It was a multi-year effort. We did a lot of engagement. We identified the goals and the elements of the plan, and a large portion of that was related to infrastructure. As you know, there is a desire for a more walkable, multimodal accessibility framework on the ground in Town Center. And to do that, we have a number of infrastructure projects that will need to get funded to create that accessibility for all, and also the types of community gathering places that we want to see that will help to foster community in the Town Center. So we have done a number of implementation items since the Town Center Plan was adopted, including the adoption of projects into the TSP. And a number of questions have arisen since then about the potential for how we actually get that infrastructure built. And one of the elements in the plan was to put together an infrastructure funding plan. The other element that's going to be briefed for you tonight is the Urban Renewal Strategic Plan update that is also happening at the same time. And I don't want to give too much away and take away from my staff's talking points. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and just introduce the staff that are here to talk about it tonight so that they can tell you about the two different projects and how they are working side by side and together to get at some of the questions that were posed in the Town Center Plan that needed to be answered and adopted post-plan adoption. So with that, I will introduce Kim Reibold, Senior Planner with the Planning Division, and Matt Lorenzen, our Economic Development Manager for the City of Wilsonville. And if you haven't had the opportunity to welcome him yet, because I can't remember that far back now. Is this your first time? Okay, so this is Matt's first time here. So please give him the full Planning Commission welcome. Go ahead, staff.
Thank you. As Miranda noted, I'm Kim Reibold, Senior Planner with the City, here with Matt Lorenzen, our Economic Development Manager tonight, to give you just touch on some brief highlights of the information we included in your packet about the Town Center Infrastructure Funding Plan, as well as the Urban Renewal Strategic Plan, and just really highlight a couple of the important interrelationships between the two of those projects. As was noted, this is born of the Town Center Plan, which the city adopted in 2019. One of the key goals in the Town Center Plan looked at safe access and connectivity, both within the Town Center area, as well as looking at how to provide better multimodal connections, both enhancing existing ones and adding new ones within the area and to the surrounding areas. The diagram that's shown on this slide are the infrastructure projects that are specifically called out as more city-led infrastructure projects that are key elements of the Town Center Plan. And these are specifically identified and were included within your packet in the table as IN.1 through IN.14.
There were two other implementation actions called out that are of note here in the town center plan. The first being, I'll go backwards as what I've shown here on the slide, but the first being an infrastructure finance study. You know, this is a sizable number of projects for this area, and we expect that our traditional funding sources, as often happens in areas of new development and change, you know, the traditional sources of SDCs aren't necessarily enough to cover the full cost of these improvements. And so the main goal of looking at an infrastructure funding study is to think about what other tools there might be out there that are well suited to support new development in the area and help fund some of these projects. Another implementation strategy was an urban renewal feasibility study and plan. So what we'll be looking at here is the first piece of that, which is the feasibility study. Urban renewal, which Matt will describe in a little more detail in one moment, is one type of funding source that can pay for some of these projects. So as part of looking at whether or not this is a component that we should be considering in the funding plan, we have to examine whether or not it's a feasible tool to be used here and meet the plan's goals. So we will, as part of these activities, get a better sense of what it is that we can do to help make some of these projects a reality. So before we dive more into the projects that we highlighted, I know we have a mix of people on the Planning Commission that have worked with urban renewal. We have others who might be less familiar. So Matt is just going to give a very quick explanation of what exactly urban renewal is.
Thank you. I trust everyone can hear me. Looks good. Thank you for that affirmation. So urban renewal is a term that's used interchangeably with another that you see just under it, tax increment finance. Urban renewal is essentially a public finance tool that is used to address what Oregon revised statutes and other statutes in other states call a condition they describe as blight. Blight can mean a lot of things. It's vaguely described in statute, but there's a pretty broad license for jurisdictions to determine what exactly blight means. But the intent of, or rather the broad meaning of blight is property within a defined area within the jurisdiction that is essentially underperforming in its ability to contribute to the tax base, to contribute to the community. It doesn't necessarily have to be a function of taxation and tax revenue growth. It could just be an area that has great potential to be, for example, a hub of the community, such as the town center area, but is currently not meeting that aspiration or that vision. So, this is the intent of urban renewal as a public finance tool. It's meant for a specific purpose, again, to essentially make an area that is less desirable, more desirable. It is funded in a unique way. It's called tax increment finance because of the way that it functions. So you see on this graph, you have time along the x-axis and appraised value along the y. And in theory, value grows over time, and so you see that trajectory depicted. With urban renewal or tax increment finance, what happens when an urban renewal plan area is formed is that tax base is essentially frozen in time, and those taxing districts that receive revenue from properties within that defined area, they continue to receive taxes, but the incremental growth in taxation that occurs year after year after the plan is set in place goes toward urban renewal. And it's not meant to fund projects necessarily in cash. In other words, it's not that that increment accrues over time and then once you save up enough money, you spend it on project X, Y, or Z. It's meant to be used strategically to be leveraged and to service new debt. and to do projects today that will have a long-lasting impact, spur new development, and ultimately grow that tax base, which is really the end outcome, desired outcome of urban renewal. So a few other things I'll just point out on this graphic. You see the creation point in time, and this is all theoretical. That's why there's no dates attached to it. And then a period that continues through sunset, and you see that also noted. Typically it's a 20 to 30 year period, but that's not required. You see that above the dotted line, which is meant to represent the frozen base, you have this incremental revenue that's coming in. Once the area within an urban renewal district is performing as it should, once these strategic investments have been made and new development is occurring, this tax increment growth is starting to pick up pace over time. Once the area is performing, the revenues begin to be shared back with those districts that have been foregoing the revenue. And so you see that depicted. And then finally at sunset, all of this new economic activity and tax revenue that's been generated through the strategic investments made through urban renewal goes back then to those taxing districts. Those districts include almost all those that you see on your property tax bill. They would include vector control, the city of Wilsonville. School districts are, you will see it on your tax bill, but the way Oregon revised statutes is set up, the school is made whole by the state of Oregon for any tax revenue that they forgo from urban renewal. So I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but I just wanted to note the basics of urban renewal. I think it's important to understand how it functions and to also let you know that our Urban Renewal Task Force, which has been meeting together since March on a monthly basis, they've met twice so far, we'll meet again in May. They've looked at several things as noted in your staff report. They've been looking at the performance of past uses of urban renewal in the city. We're also getting now into the phase where we're talking about the potential to use urban renewal anew. There are 2 districts in the city that are getting ready to sunset or be retired. And so this creates an opportunity then for the city to form a new area for strategic investment. And so the town center area is an area of that's top of mind with the task force. It's been brought up already, and in our May meeting, we'll be discussing it in much more detail. Kim and/or Miranda will be joining us to talk to the task force about the town center and some of the projects that Kim was just mentioning that need a funding source, or funding sources rather. And the belief at this point is that urban renewal is a great candidate for filling gaps, funding gaps, and catalyzing new development within the town center area that's aligned with the vision of the town center plan. Kim, with that, I think I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Matt. So I think Matt covered pretty succinctly the project goals of the Urban Renewal Strategic Plan update and what the work he is doing with the Urban Renewal Task Force encompasses. That project is important to what we're doing with the infrastructure funding plan because it's going to look at how the city has used urban renewal and if the city wishes to continue using it in the future. That's obviously a very important piece into how we look at the town center infrastructure funding plan to be able to assess both the viability and the desire to continue potentially using it as a tool in the future. A couple of other important notes I'll highlight. The difference being with the infrastructure funding plan, we're really just focused solely on the town center and developing a strategy that we can use to pay for these identified infrastructure projects. So urban renewal might be a piece. There might be other tools that the city can consider to also help pay for this. One important piece that we're working with our consultant team on right now is updating the cost estimates. So you'll notice that the table we included as an attachment to your staff report had some cost estimates. And those were pretty high-level, planning-level cost estimates that were included with the town center plan. But when it gets down to actually thinking about, how costs have potentially escalated over the past couple of years, and thinking about how, it's really important in establishing a funding plan to pretty clearly have a sense of what those costs could be. We realized we needed to do some closer looks, particularly at some of the roadway projects and the other sewer and water infrastructure projects, to be sure that we were using the right numbers. So that's the work that we're doing now. Once we have that, we will start looking at what we think the city's share of some of these costs should be. Typically, development does pay for some of infrastructure projects, but there's a certain amount that they pay for, and other pieces beyond that the city will pay for out of this funding plan and strategy that we create. And so part of that is identifying where there might be gaps between what we expect the city should be accounting for and what we think we can get out of our traditional funding sources, such as systems development charges. And so we'll look at some different funding tools, and moving forward to the timeline where we will move that. So this is kind of a comparison of both of the project's timelines. We'll assess some different funding tools, do that urban renewal feasibility analysis, and then once we have findings from that work, we'll be coming back to you later on this year to present that. With the goal of adopting a funding strategy for the town center by the end of the year. But as you can see, based on what Matt's described, it's really going to be important to see where the urban strategic renewal plan update goes relative to the work that we're doing. And so these timelines are fairly closely coordinated, and it's going to be really important. Matt and I will continue to communicate our progress as we move along to make sure that we're getting everything in the right sequence, and so that as we develop the infrastructure funding plan, we're being mindful of the work that the larger look at the city's use of urban renewal is doing. So with that, that's just a quick overview. We really want to have an opportunity for you to be able to ask questions of us as we move forward. We can, do our best to answer some of those now, or there might be others that are a little more in depth that we can come back to you with some answers later on. I will stop my share here and happy to take your questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Matt. Matt, welcome to the Planning Commission. I hadn't remembered seeing you before, so I wasn't sure if I had missed you at a previous meeting. Nice to have you here, and nice to see you. Great job. I'm going to open it up. We'll do this a little more free form. I'm not sure there's going to be as many comments as the last one, so I'll just open it up to the commissioners, and we'll see who jumps first.
Commissioner.
Go for it, Commissioner Woods.
Okay, thank you. I realize that you guys are early in this process, but you've had a couple of meetings already. Is there anything out of those meetings that you've had so far that you'd like to share with the commission that might be informational, but also to help us understand what you might be dealing with so far and what you're seeing?
Sure. I'd be happy to comment a little bit. And then we have a liaison to the Planning Commission on the task force, Commissioner Carr, and so I'd invite him to comment as well. Looks like he's got his hand raised. To date, what we've really covered, as I noted before, is sort of a retrospect on the historic, or well, they're not historic yet, nearly historic urban renewal areas in the city. There's a west side plan and an east side plan, both of which are nearing their sunset dates. The other plan, I guess there's two other plans in addition to those, the Coffee Creek industrial area urban renewal plan, which is in its infancy and will continue on. And then the city's WIN zone program, Wilsonville Investment Now. It's an economic development incentive program, which probably we should leave for a different day. But we've been spending time in the meeting so far just looking at those areas. So again, number one, the two areas that are about to sunset, looking at how they've performed, lessons learned, what could be done better. Timing with investments in urban renewal is critical, and so we've been taking a look at that. And then our most recent meeting was focused on Coffee Creek and Wynn, again, looking at how those plans may be perhaps modified as we move into the future. And now our third meeting in May, which it will be on the 23rd, it's the first opportunity we're really having to start looking to the future now. So nothing to share on that front yet, as we haven't quite gotten there. But I will say that in both of the meetings we've held so far, at no prompting of staff, there have been task force members who have raised the topic of town center as an area of high interest for urban renewal investment. So that would be my main takeaways. Commissioner Carr, what would you contribute?
Yeah, I would concur with the assessment of that. I think I have been a proponent of urban renewal in the way that the city of Wilsonville has done it specifically, because I think that it has been very well managed, and both of the ones that are closing in on completion have been highly successful and have resulted in some incredible projects to make this city what it is today, to allow it to have grown to the size of a city that we are without too much pain involved in the process. I think the city's been very well managed in its capital improvement projects. Urban renewal has been an incredible funding source for that. I think what I also like about this particular project is the fact that we are looking at the infrastructure funding for town center in concert with that urban renewal, because I think it will be a primary source of funding. And I'm pleased that they're being considered together. So that's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you for that. It appears that with those projects that are sunsetting, that there's been some really good key learnings from that. And, you know, I would echo what you just said also, Commissioner Carr. You know, I've been a resident here in Wilsonville for 26 years and have seen that development in those areas you're talking about. And I would echo what you said, too, that the city's done a good job in those areas. So thank you both for your comments.
Let me just add one other thing. I think the one challenge that other cities have in their urban renewals is the fact that the incremental taxing restriction that the city gets, and the schools, although not necessarily Oregon, the fire department, the police, you know, those type of people that take it, that use the money that comes in from the tax financing, they have been very open to the success of our past urban renewal, or almost past urban renewal, and I think we have most of their buy-off, that we can do that again. So I know the state of Oregon kind of is trying to squash urban renewal, or TIF, a bit, but I think we can hold Wilsonville up as success to those, and how that financing has not only allowed our city to grow, but we've done it without harming those that need the tax revenue as well. So
I'll quickly chime in if that's all right. Commissioner Carr is spot on. Urban renewal has been a topic of conversation historically among the Oregon legislative bodies as a bit of a point of controversy. However, the Oregon Economic Development Association and its former sister organization which advocated for urban renewal in the state, has invested considerable energy and resources in building back stronger relationships with taxing districts which have previously been not big proponents of urban renewal. And to that end, they've been pretty successful. As far as I'm aware right now, there's not much, if any, energy to end urban renewal as we know it, but that hasn't always been the case. But there's been good progress in mending some relationships with the taxing districts in just the past year or two.
All right, other commissioners' comments?
It sounds like the timing's there. That's the impression I got.
The work we're doing with urban renewal strategy, I think, dovetails really nicely with the work that the planning division is doing and engineering with the financing plan for infrastructure needs.
All right, I'm not seeing any of the other commissioners go off of mute. So a couple of things on my side. I think urban renewal is a key to the infrastructure development for town center, and that concept of, especially with all the things that I see in the infrastructure investments, we're going to need those to be that catalyst to help kickstart the projects. I have a hard time visualizing town center coming to fruition without some of those things in place. And so, I think one of the keys for me is making sure that we clearly identify what those highest priorities are and have a good, thoughtful process to identify which ones are really important to kickstart that development. And so, I see that you guys have timing on the actions in terms of short, medium, and long. I think that's good. I think there might be some work to do just to make sure that those all make sense in terms of which ones are really going to start the development. And then, the last thing that I saw, just as I was going through and looking at the investments, we've got something on the order of almost $100 million in estimated cost for infrastructure. When you put it together like that, that's a huge number, and I'm very interested to see, that funding breakdown and how you guys see this coming to fruition. And okay, of that $100 million, here's how much we expect to come from SDCs. Here's how much we expect to get from the federal government, and then here's how much we expect to get from urban renewal or whatever the other funding mechanisms are. To get a better feel for really what this is going to look like as we move forward from a funding perspective.
And that's the info we'll be able to bring back as we take this info gathering piece and then move into the development of strategies, so that we will be sure to include some of that with our packet next time.
Great. All right, last call on the commissioner comments. Right. Gone. Kim, Matt, thank you again for the input. Good info session. Look forward to seeing the next round.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. City Council action minutes is the next informational item. No staff presentation. Ms. Bayshell, anything of note that you want to inform the council on or the commissions on?
Yeah, I may just note an item that was at the April 4th City Council meeting, the City Attorney Employment Agreement. As many of you may note, we have a new person sitting to my right. For some of you, it's a new old person. And so I would like to take a moment to introduce Miss Amanda Guile Hinman. I tried to skip your first name. As many of you know her, she has sat here and advised the Planning Commission in the past as the Assistant City Attorney for the City of Wilsonville. She left us for a while to go and be the City Attorney for the City of McMinnville, and we missed her very much and are very lucky to have her join our team and be back here staffing the Planning Commission in the capacity as the City Attorney. So I'm super happy to have her back. Everybody at City Hall is super happy to have her back. Well, throughout the city. We're not all here in City Hall. And I'm certain many of you are excited to have her back. So not everybody here does know her, so I would encourage us to do our little round table of hellos from the different commissioners if you'd like to introduce yourself and a little fun fact about yourself, and then we'll allow Amanda to do the same thing.
Great. Well, welcome back, Amanda. I'll kick it off. Ron Haberline. I've been around for a while. Nice to see you again. And a fun fact, I like airplanes. We'll go with that. All right, Commissioner Willard.
Hello, I think we've met before. Jennifer Willard. Good to see you again. My fun fact is we bought a fishing boat.
Oh.
Wow.
When do we go out in the water?
Yes, we've been going out so far, so you're welcome to join us anytime. Just bundle up, Buttercup. It's cold out there when the kids moving.
Commissioner Mesa.
Hello again. It's nice to have you back. I don't know if I have a fun fact. I have been gardening. That's my fun fact. No fishing boat, no airplanes, forget it. Just down on my knees and weeding.
I can guarantee that's a whole lot cheaper than either of the other two options.
Safer too.
Yeah. Commissioner Gallagher.
Hi, Olive Gallagher. Welcome aboard.
Fun fact?
That's it.
Oh, all right, fine. All right, Commissioner Tazinski.
Blush, blush.
Hi, nice to meet you. Welcome. My fun fact is that my Rottweiler's in the room on every meeting. You just can't see him.
Hey, Commissioner Woods.
Yes, welcome back. I remember you from years ago. I was on the Development Review Board for 2 terms, and now on the Planning Commission. So, a fun fact, I love to cook. I'm an avowed foodie, and I think I do pretty good at it, too. So that's the fun fact about me.
Hey, Commissioner Carr.
Amanda, welcome back. I have bumped into you a couple times before. I know Barbara thought the world of you, so glad to have you back in the city. My fun fact is I have the most expensive hobby of anyone. I have 2 children.
Oh, yeah.
1 middle schooler and 1 grade schooler, so yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Been there, done that.
Well, I have an older daughter, too, so I've been there and done that, and then I'm doing it again.
Now you're doing it again. What does that make you?
Old.
Old.
And a glutton for punishment.
And, yeah, I must love children.
Well,
all right.
Yes. Thank you all for introducing yourselves, and I'm really excited to work with all of you. Miranda and I have a kind of running joke in that she always thinks she could play an attorney, and I always think that I could play a planner. So my hobby is that I am a big Lego freak. I have an entire room devoted to Legos, and my favorite theme is Lego cities, and one of my favorite sets is a 1981 Public Works building. So, so I think I was always destined to work for a city.
Oh, that's fantastic. I ought to send my son over and hang out at your place. That's great. Ms. Batesell, anything else on the City Council action minutes?
Nothing else for me, thank you.
Okay, and then if not, let's see. Roll down to our PC work program. Anything of note here over the next couple months?
Not for me.
Okay. And are we still potentially looking at July for in-person at the city again?
That's a great question. The front counter progress appears to be slow moving, but it's not clear to me how much additional work is needed to get that done and when that's happening. So as before, more to come.
Okay, I look forward to getting a date on the books for that.
Same here, and I look forward to having a front counter.
Yes, I can imagine. All right, I think that was the last item on the agenda. So at this point, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
All right, looks like we've got a motion and a second and another motion from Mr. Mesbah on mute, so I think we've got plenty of coverage. So given that, the meeting is adjourned at 7:40 p.m. Thank you.